Question 1. The new Batman movie is getting great reviews. Many are praising the performances and the story. The primary criticism is the runtime of almost 3 hours. What dimension are critics complaining about? So I haven't seen the new movie yet. I'm hoping to go this weekend, but I've heard great things. The only thing I'm hearing negative is that it's a long movie. It's almost 3 hours. So when the critics were measuring this complaint, what dimension were they concerned with? Were they worried about frequency? Were they worried about how many times something happened? No. Remember, the first things first, if you're a little lost on measurement, is ask yourself, are we dealing with an amount of something or are we dealing with time? And in this case, we're dealing with time, right? So we can immediately eliminate frequency. We can also eliminate rate because rate is just frequency with a time component added. But since there is no frequency involved, frequency and rate are both eliminated. That leaves us with duration and inter-response time. IRT. Are we worried about the time in between two responses? Are we worried about the time in between movies? Let's say. No. We're worried about this one movie, and we're worried about the length. From beginning to end, we're looking at 3 hours. And 3 hours is what? That, of course, will be duration. Critics are complaining about the duration of the movie, even though everything else seems pretty good. You're cooking dinner for your boyfriend and want to try out a new sauce recipe. The recipe says reduce the heat to a simmer and stir every 2 minutes. What type of measurement might you use for stirring behavior? All right, back-to-back measurement questions might happen on the exam. The exam questions you can't predict. You might get 3 measurement questions in a row. You might get 4, okay? We have to be ready for anything. So we have another measurement question. What is the process we just went through? Are we looking at the amount of responses? Are we counting anything? Or are we looking at time? Well, we're clearly looking at time every 2 minutes. And every 2 minutes, what are we doing? We're stirring. So we need to be sure that we stir at least every 2 minutes. So for instance, I stir once, that's response 1. 2 minutes later, I stir again, it's response 2. 2 minutes later, stir again, response 3, so on and so forth. So if I'm measuring the time in between my identical or same responses, what am I using? Am I using partial interval recording? Well, we wouldn't use partial interval recording because we need to make sure and measure every instance of behavior for the entire duration of the sauce. We need to use a continuous measurement procedure. Partial interval recording, we would take a small interval of this time. It would be discontinuous. We need continuous. We need to measure every instance of behavior. When you need to measure every single time a behavior occurs, you have to use continuous measurement. So it leaves us with latency, frequency, and IRT. Well, we can eliminate frequency because we're not counting how many stirs we make. We're measuring how long in between stirs it takes, or how long it takes in between stirs. Okay, big distinction there. So we have latency and IRT. Latency is what? Latency is the time between the SD and the first response. So from that first time, okay, we start to simmer to that very first stir, that's latency. But now we're measuring every stir from there on out and the time in between those stirs. So now we're measuring the time in between responses. That's going to be inter-response time or IRT. Question 3. If your supervising BCBA tells you to implement a DRA procedure, what interventions are you going to be using? All right. What is DRA? Clearly, it's a differential reinforcement procedure. What type? Differential reinforcement of alternative behavior. And when we're using differential reinforcement, what are we doing? What is the definition of differential reinforcement? If you know the definition of differential reinforcement, this question becomes very easy. If you don't, it becomes a lot more difficult. I can't stress enough. I say it all the time. You have to know your terms. You have to know your definitions. Everybody I talk to, everybody I tutor, the ones who are fluent pass. The ones who aren't have a much harder time. All right, so DRA, differential reinforcement, reinforcing one behavior, putting another behavior on extinction. And since it's a DRA, we're teaching a replacement behavior, so we will be reinforcing a specific thing and putting a specific thing on extinction. So what interventions are we going to be using? A, extinction. Will we be using extinction? Absolutely. We just said differential reinforcement implements or utilizes extinction. Do we pick extinction and move on? No way, right? We read all of our answer choices. We don't pick the first one we like and move on. We're looking for the best answer choice. So B, reinforcement. Do we also use reinforcement? Well, it's differential reinforcement. So reinforcement will be a major component of our procedure. All right, so now we're using both extinction and reinforcement. If we look at C, what do we have? Extinction and reinforcement. C is going to be a better answer than A and B. A and B are both correct. C is the best answer. And what are we doing? We're picking the best answer. And then D, why is D wrong? Because differential reinforcement does not involve punishment. It involves extinction. Again, extinction is not a punishment procedure. They are two different things. Excuse me. They are two different things. Even though both work to reduce behavior, extinction withholds, punishment adds or removes. They're two different things. So if we're using differential reinforcement, a DRA procedure, we are going to be using extinction and reinforcement. Which of the following answer choices best represents a partial physical prompt? Think about your prompt hierarchy, right? If we're going most to least, we might start at physical, we might go to partial physical, then modeling, and then we have like gestural, verbal, that sort of thing. This question wants to know, what represents a partial physical prompt? So if we're using a partial physical prompt, there will be some sort of physical engagement with the client, but we're not actually doing the entire task for them. That's the difference between full physical and partial physical. With full physical, we hand over hand the entire task for them. Okay, it's completely errorless. Partial physical, we might guide them to what they're supposed to do or lightly tap their elbows or shoulders, but we're not actually doing the entire thing for them. That's what we're looking for, okay? So which of the following answer choices best represents a partial physical prompt? A, you grab the client's hand and guide it to the doorknob and turn the doorknob with the client. Well, this is definitely a physical prompt. We're grabbing the client's hand, but are we doing the entire task for them? We are. Grabbing the hand, guiding it, and then turning the doorknob. That is a full physical prompt. We need a partial physical prompt. B, you point at the doorknob, indicating to the client that you want them to turn the doorknob. You're not physically engaging with the client. This is more of a gestural prompt, not a partial physical. C, you grab the client's hand, physical, guide it towards the doorknob, and then you let the client turn the doorknob. Yes, this is a partial physical compared to A, where we're fully, errorlessly guiding the client physically. Now we're only partially physically guiding them. We guide them to the doorknob and let them do the rest. C looks like our best answer. Let's read D. You say, okay, now what do we do after the client walks up to the door? That's more of a verbal prompt. There's no partial physical, or there's no physical prompting going on. So what represents a partial physical prompt? That will be C. You grab the client's hand, guide it towards the doorknob, and then you let the client turn the doorknob. You only help them about halfway there, and then you allow them to do the rest. James wants to increase a student's on-task behavior, but has other students to worry about. He can take data on the student's behavior for about 15 minutes each class. What type of measurement should James use? Another measurement question, okay? We're getting a lot of practice, a lot of reps with measurement today. That's great. Measurement's very important. You need to get measurement questions right on the exam. Measurement's very easy on the RBT exam, okay? There's not a whole lot to it, right? In this case, what do we know? We know James wants to increase a student's on-task behavior, but he has other students to worry about. What do we know about group settings? What do we know about having to worry about other students? And what do we know about limited time frames? We can't use continuous measurement. There's no way James can record every instance of this student's behavior. Too much else is going on, too many restrictions. That means what? That means he will be using discontinuous measurement. And when we talk about discontinuous measurement, what are we talking about? We're talking about time sampling. We're talking about interval recording. So partial interval, whole interval, momentary time sampling, and play check. That's what we're kind of looking for here, okay? So we have duration. Do we use duration? No, right? We're not using continuous measurement. We can eliminate duration. Same with IRT, okay? We can eliminate IRT as continuous. We're not using it. That leaves us with whole interval and momentary time sampling, okay? Now, this is where it gets a little tricky. If he wants to increase the student's on-task behavior, what does he want to do? Well, he needs to make sure James is staying on task the entire interval. Now, whole interval will ensure he does that because as he's observing James, James has to stay on task the full time to get credit. But what about momentary time sampling? In momentary time sampling, James only has to be on task at the end of the interval. So if the interval is a minute, James doesn't have to work for 59 seconds. As long as he's on task, when James looks up at the end of the interval, James will count it. All right. So you can kind of game the system that way. A much better measurement when you're looking at increasing a behavior like staying on task is going to be whole interval. All right. Because this way you guarantee that they are actually staying on task for an extended period of time rather than just when you look up at the end of an interval. Kind of a tricky question. It's almost a two-parter. First, you need to decide, okay, what type of measurement am I using? Discontinuous because it's group. He's got other students to worry about. He's got limited time. And then you have to decide what's better, whole interval or momentary time sampling. If you didn't understand that, go back, review continuous and discontinuous measurement, come back to the question, try it again, okay? Work on it until you understand it. Next, you receive supervision from one of the BCBAs at your clinic. One day, the BCBA asks you out to dinner. You actually like the BCBA and want to say yes. What must you do? All right, workplace relationships occur. When you spend 2/3 of your life around people, okay, sometimes feelings develop. It's almost inevitable, right? So in that case, what does the BACB ethical code say about the situation? You're getting supervision. Your supervisor is interested in you. You're interested in your supervisor. It's warranted. What do you have to do, though? If they ask you out, what do you need to do? A, you're allowed to go on a date with the BCBA since you're not actually in a relationship. Is that true? No. Okay. Now we're slowly crossing the line of a supervisor-supervisee relationship. As long as that person is supervising you, you cannot engage in any sort of outside of relationship with them. Okay. Ethically, there's a lot of conflict of interest. They might take advantage of you. You might take advantage of them. There's a lot of things that come into play when you get in a relationship with someone who's supervising you. So you are not allowed to go on them, even allowed to go on a date with them, since that implies some sort of deeper relationship than just a supervision relationship. So we can eliminate A. B, inform the owner of the clinic and then go out on a date. It's the same thing. You're still getting supervision from this person, not until you terminate that supervision contract and not until they stop supervising you can you go on that date. But once you do terminate supervision with your BCBA, you are allowed to then date them, okay? The rules are different for clients, but as far as supervisees and supervisors, as long as they terminate that relationship of supervision, you are good to go on a date with them. So C looks like our answer. D, you are not allowed to go on a date with the supervisor. Well, technically true, okay? If you want to say yes, you need to terminate the supervision with the BCBA and go on the date. D is right in the respect that if they are your supervisor, you're not allowed to go on the date. But what does the question say? If you actually like the BCBA and you want to go out to dinner with them, what must you do? C, terminate your supervision with the BCBA and then go on the date. Blake goes out of town on a trip with his friends. Typically, his girlfriend will text him once or twice a day, but now she is texting him almost hourly. What would you hypothesize is the function of this behavior? When you are trying to guess or hypothesize the function of a behavior, ask yourself, what is being withheld or what is being added? What is increasing this behavior? What is maintaining this behavior? Okay, why is this behavior occurring? In this case, Blake is out of town. His girlfriend, who typically texts him once or twice a day, is now texting him almost hourly. So the rate of texting has increased dramatically. Is anything being added to the situation? Well, no, not really, right? But what about being taken away? Well, now the girlfriend is much more deprived of Blake than before. She probably receives significantly more attention when he's home without his friends than she does when he's out of town with his friends. So what is being withheld is the attention. Okay. So when we hypothesize the function, what are we going to say? Is it a tangible? Is Blake's girlfriend trying to get an item? No, she's just texting him, right? She wants that attention. She wants that response. So if we look at B, attention looks like our best guess, right? Based on the information, what is being withheld is attention. She is now texting more frequently to gain back that attention. Escape, is his girlfriend trying to escape from anything? No, it doesn't seem like it. And then automatic, of course, can't be automatic because automatic only requires one person. This is socially mediated because there are two people involved. Why is she texting Blake all the time? Because attention is being withheld. She's trying to gain attention. The function of the texting is attention. Walk through those steps when trying to hypothesize the function of the behavior. Remember, hypothesis is really just our best guess, what we think is going to happen. So when we hypothesize, we can just use the information they give us. So you just need to do your best with the information that you're given, okay, to pick the best answer. Okay, praise and tokens are most often referred to as what? When we talk about praise and tokens, we're typically talking about reinforcers. Okay, yes, everything can possibly function as a punisher depending on its effect on behavior. But if we look at our answer choices, this is a reinforcement question. So what the question is actually asking is, what type of reinforcers are praise and tokens most often referred to as? A, primary reinforcers. Are praise and tokens primary reinforcers? What is a primary reinforcer? A primary reinforcer is an unconditioned or an unlearned reinforcer, most commonly food, water, warmth, comfort. Things that, given enough time and given enough deprivation, would function as reinforcement. They don't need learning history to become or to act as reinforcers. Praise and tokens do. Praise and tokens need to be paired. They need to be conditioned. They are not primary. So if we look at B, secondary reinforcers are conditioned and learned. Praise and tokens, how do they get their reinforcing properties? Through conditioning and learning. So praise and tokens are certainly secondary reinforcers. Now, do we pick B and move on? No, we keep reading. C, generalized conditioned reinforcers. A GCR, so we notice this word conditioned. Are praise and tokens conditioned? Absolutely. They are conditioned to possess reinforcing properties. And then what do we mean by generalized conditioned reinforcers? When we say GCRs or generalized reinforcers, we mean they travel. We mean we can use praise and tokens in a variety of environments, just like generalization, right, outside the learning environment. When we talk about generalized conditioned reinforcers, we're talking about reinforcement that can be used in a variety of situations. That's what makes praise and tokens so powerful. Not only are they conditioned, but they're generalized, okay? So they can be used everywhere. B and C both look good. If we look at D, we have both B and C. The reason I put these questions in there is I'm trying to teach you to read not only the question carefully, but every single answer choice. I don't want you just picking A or B and moving on. You need to read slowly. You need to go slowly and take your time, okay? Find the best answer. Not only that, but understand why the wrong answers are wrong. When delivering reinforcement to a client, you should be most concerned with what? Kind of an obscure question. Unless you know, you can't really attack the question. So let's just look at our answer choices to get an idea of what we're looking for. It's a reinforcement scenario. We're delivering reinforcement to the client. What are we concerned with? Are we concerned with the magnitude, the time in between the response and the reinforcement, the antecedent, or the topography of the reinforcement? So at some point, we're probably concerned with all of these in the contingency, right? The question says, what are you most concerned with, though, when delivering reinforcement? Well, let's start with the antecedent. When do you deliver reinforcement? You deliver reinforcement after the response. You're not really concerned about the antecedent okay, when delivering the reinforcement, you're really concerned with the response, okay? Now, given the variety of behaviors we might encounter, there might be a situation where you reinforce responses in certain situations and not in others. But in general, you're more worried about the response when dealing with reinforcement than you are the antecedent. What about the topography of the reinforcement? Well, you want to pick something that is reinforcing to the client, and that might involve different looks or different types of reinforcement. But are you most concerned with that? No, if you're delivering reinforcement, we can safely assume it's a reinforcer, okay? What about the magnitude? Are you concerned with how much reinforcement you're giving? Typically, no. If you're giving praise or you're giving tokens, if those are going to function as reinforcement, you're going to give the required amount, okay? You're not overly thinking how much reinforcement is too much reinforcement. That should be all in the plan anyway. So what you're most concerned with when delivering reinforcement to the client is the time between the response and the reinforcement. In other words, the contiguity, okay? Why is this important? Well, think about it. If you're supposed to be delivering reinforcement for raising their hand, and the client raises their hand, and you don't deliver reinforcement until 20 seconds later, think about all the other responses they could have engaged in those 20 seconds. Who knows what you're reinforcing? So in order to ensure that we're reinforcing the correct behavior, we need to be very, very concerned with the time between the correct response and the reinforcement, also known as contiguity. And then finally, terminology that is specific to a particular profession or group of trained individuals is often referred to as blank. You should avoid using this when communicating with parents. Okay, kind of off the task list, right? What I'm trying to, I guess, teach here is this word that the exam sometimes uses. They often refer to terminology that we don't use with parents as technical language. You want to avoid using technical language when parent training. But sometimes they'll refer to it as something else. So if we're talking about terminology specific to a profession, like ABA, are we talking about slang? Well, not necessarily. Slang is usually more casual, okay? Slang is a more casual way of conversating. While sometimes specific to a group, you don't necessarily need to avoid using slang with parents. The word we're really looking for is jargon, okay? And if you've never read that word, you might not know this answer, and that's fine. I want you to just be aware that this word exists. And jargon is exactly this: terminology specific to a profession or group of trained individuals, okay, that we need to avoid using when communicating with parents. If I use the term differential reinforcement, that's jargon. If I say increase a behavior by ignoring another behavior, that's not jargon, okay? That's the difference. You want to avoid using jargon. You want to avoid using technical language. Should you avoid using non-technical language? Absolutely not. Non-technical language is what you want to use. And what about objective language? Again, no. We want to be objective. We want to say exactly what we see, not so much our feelings, but exactly what's happening. So terminology that is specific to a particular profession or group of trained individuals that you should avoid using is jargon. Again, don't get panicky if you've never seen that word. I'm trying to make you familiar with it because they do sometimes use it on the exam. Okay? All right. So thanks for watching. Questions, comments, please let me know. Check out rbtexamreview.com. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.